situation, I know one of the happiest things of your life was the interest that Eddie took in the ring and following in the footsteps, and it must have been a real thrill when you started working together as a tag team, actually in the ring. But it's kind of taken a little sour note as jealousy has kind of worked its way in from another father-son team.
You're right, Lance, and a lot of times things like that happen, you know, and nobody can be any prouder of their kids whenever they want to do something. They see them do their best. But, you know, Buddy has, man, he's become unreal. You know, I couldn't believe that the man could be like this. But I want to tell Buddy one thing, since he's looked like he's turned over a new leaf and he don't want to be the man that I thought he was. Buddy, I'm telling you straight to your face now, man. You told me not to call you Hog Jaws. I'll call you Hog Jaws or anything else that I want to, any time, day of the week that I want to. And I'll tell you what, man, whenever we get in the ring, I told you not to lay a hand on my kid. I told you that I'd beat your brains out if you did. And that's exactly what I'll do, because we're going to be in there, buddy, and whenever we do, I'm going to do just exactly that. I'm going to deflate them jaws. And they could be, a lot of you, they could be deflated too, buddy. But the main thing is, baby, I just want you. That's all. And as far as your kid goes, I don't want to lay a hand on him. I'm going to do to him what you should have done 10 or 12 years ago. I'm going to pull his tights down and paddle his butt real good and teach him a little manners.
From title belts to Hall of Fame, Doug and Tommy carved the name. Fists of fury and hearts of gold. Every story, every fight retold. Tales of glory, laughter, pride. Tennessee warriors with hearts open wide. In the ring or on the air, legends living without a care. On the mic they roar, on the mat they soar. Dangerous conversations, fans want to know. Podcast kings ruling the waves. Memphis wrestling raising the stage.
Hey everybody, welcome to the 25th episode of Dangerous Conversations with Dangerous Doug Gilbert and Tommy Wildfire Rich. Guys, how we doing this week?
Man, I'm doing great, Gene. Kind of cold here in Tennessee, which I think is kind of cold on you. And Tommy's probably sitting down there in his shorts with flip-flops on the beach. But, man, I'm doing good.
Yes, shoot. Hey, I want a big shout-out to everybody. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful. Well, I mean, it's cloudy today, kind of rainy, but it's, like I told you, I got my door propped up out in the house. So, yeah, I'm not quite as cold as you guys are.
Doug, you know Tommy's always got it made out there at the beach.
Oh, yeah. But that's good. That's good for Tommy. I like for him. He gets to walk up and down that beach and get him some exercise and look around and see all the sights and go in probably maybe walk up to a bar or two maybe and have a good time.
Maybe. Yeah, look at that every now and then.
So guys, as we're recording this, we just passed the birthday of your dad, Doug. Mr. Tommy Gilbert's birthday was January the 15th, 1940.
It sure was, Gene. He would have been, what dad would have been 85.
85.
Would have been 85, yeah, and everything. But anyway, hey, my dad lived a long, good life, though. And, man, you talking about some stories and everything, which Tommy can tell you about those stories, which I can also. And, I mean, man, just being on the road and you can go. I mean, you keep up with the territory stuff so good and everything. You could tell me where he was at here and there. And also, as far as a kid, remember all the different territories he was going to and when he was gone from home and everything. But there's some funny stories that I'll sure tell y'all during this episode. And I'm sure there's a lot of funny stories Tommy can tell you.
Oh, yeah.
I got a couple. But most of them tricking me.
But I know, Gene, you've got probably some history on some of the matches and different things that my dad's been in and against some certain people and some people that people might not have think that he had worked with and everything.
Now,
We do. So
for my first memory, though, that I remember, but this is before I ever met. I was probably about 11. My dad used to take me practice every week, and I'll never forget. I become, is it real? Is it not? Is it real? Is it not? And of course, I used to love to go see the Fargos, but on this particular night, Lou Thesz is the world heavyweight champion, and he wrestled Tommy Gilbert. Tommy come in, and of course, he was a fan favorite. Lou Thesz had the silk robe on, and I'll never. And I was on that fence, was it real or not? And all of a sudden, Tommy come across that ring, drop kicked that Thesz, and he took a big bump over the top rope. And I thought, oh my God, this shit is real, son. And they proceeded to have one of the angriest matches I've ever seen in my life. I mean, and you talking that old school style, rugged and just laying in on each other. I mean, but what a hell of a match it was. I was about probably 11 at that time.
And that's one of the deals, Gene, which my dad was kind of Jerry Jarrett's wrestler type guys, which I'm not saying the other guys weren't wrestler type, but as far as like the Lou Thesz type, and I'm not comparing my dad to Lou Thesz, but I'm just saying the actual wrestler type where the other guys was more into already started into the entertainment part, and they'd rather not wrestle Lou Thesz. I mean, even though he was the world's champion and everything, but it was, my dad told me a lot of stories about when Lou would come in, and they would say, "Well, who are we going to get to work with Lou?" And all the time, about most of the time, 90% of the time, my dad would be the one that wound up working against him. But my dad loved that. That was right up my dad's alley. He loved that, and that was the kind of, I mean, like I said, my dad was trained that way, and I mean, till the day he died, he believed. I mean, you didn't say wrestling was a fake or nothing like that. And I mean, I got a story about one night we was in two of the pilots flew Jeff Jarrett and Frank Morrell to a town, and a manager was in there with them. There was like three of them, but anyway, so those two pilots walked in our dressing room. They started laughing, saying, "Well, that manager we just flew up here is fixing to go against the two other guys that was in the plane." They started saying, "Well, this has got to be fake." I thought my dad freaking started yelling at both of them, and I thought he was going to beat the pilots up. And Frank Morrell run in there real quick and got them out of the room because that's who was going to have to fly them back. And my dad told me to beat them up. I'd have beat them both up, and my dad was about to himself. But you talking about a strange little situation that night. But I mean, there's a million of those type instances.
So now your grandfather, Arlie Gilbert, was also a wrestler, right? And you talk about like real, and that he wrestled in like the carnival circuit and stuff.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Back, like, I mean, which I won't say it's all real because I got arthritis all over me just like Tommy does, and Tommy's got two new hips, and ain't no telling what else Tommy's got new on him that didn't come in his body originally. But anyway, but like you're saying, real as far as we're talking about going back as far as the carnival days, and as far as when when you stand in the ring and you challenge the crowd and everything, and then it went from that. And which that's where I was named after my grandfather, which as far as his middle name is my middle name and everything. But my grandfather was he was a cool dude and everything. And but yeah, he wrestled in the carnivals and everything. And then, like I said, my dad always loved wrestling from that point on. But then when he had a chance to start training and everything, he loved the business. But I mean, it was that, I want to say old school, but I mean, back then it wasn't none of this, and I don't want to say stuff like you see now. I'm not talking about TV. I'm just talking about the town to town guys, where you could say just where we would say backyard wrestling. There was not a such thing. You had to be tough to, like when Tommy started. If you wasn't tough, you didn't get in the wrestling business. And that's what, I mean, when my dad started, you know, I mean, them guys never made it out of the school, or they wouldn't make it through the first day of training if you wasn't tough.
I've heard it said today that there's like this saying that people go, wrestling's for everybody. Everybody should be able to be involved in wrestling if they want to. I mean, even in like you guys' day, when you got in and when Tommy got in, and then, you know, like especially your dad, you had to fight your way into the business. Like if you weren't tough, they didn't want you here, right? Like you really had to go a long way to prove yourself. You wasn't just like, come on in, come wrestle, it'll be fun type thing.
No, and I mean, it was one of which I'll let Tommy speak right after this, but I mean, you know, my dad was trained by Mario Galento, and I think Al Galento worked as his brother and everything, but them guys was like freaking, like I said, that Mario Galento was like a freaking evil pirate like guy to me. What I mean, if you look at the thing, which Tommy I think said that he saw him a time or two or something, but Tommy how was it? Just tell him. I mean, I mean, I know Tommy's heard a million other stories before he broke in, but when Tommy broke in, it wasn't no cakewalk.
No, I mean it was. I mean, but them guys. I mean, they were with each other the more they liked it. You know, I mean that was just the school they was from, and I was coming in on the tail end, and you see them, they'd still wrestle rugged, and then some would wrestle women, some of them would be, but I mean, not hurting you, just, you know, I mean, what wrestling's supposed to be, I reckon, you know, it wasn't none of that, just, you know, they'd say, if you're going to punch me, you better not miss. If you do, then, and I about tied up one time for that, you know, because, you know, they'd rather you knock the shit out of them than they had you miss a punch. You know, so yeah, they just a different breed. I mean, the business is, you know, when I broke in, it's like Dougie said, Tommy. I mean, he worked with the, you know, I mean, he come from the Funks, and I mean, he wrestled the best of the best back then, and could hold his own with any of them. I mean, yeah, it's a match I seen with him, Lou Thesz at the National Fair. I mean, I still remember that. I can still see the mad crowd on National Fairgrounds sold out. I mean, smell the beer and the popcorn, and they come in. It was something to behold. I mean, just them guys could make it to where we could get to where we're at today with the wrestling business. You know, they the pioneers of it.
And Gene, a funny thing was all the different territories that my dad worked. He told me a story about when you know, he went to Florida, and Dory was had just took the book there, Dory Funk Jr., and Dory worked with about 2 or 3 different guys that was supposed to be their wrestling guys, which, I mean, everybody was supposed to be able to wrestle, but what I'm saying is, you know, you had a lot of gimmick guys that was actually over in them days, and what was good, it was good different gimmicks that was believable and like killer type gimmicks, but then you'd also have your 2 or 3 or 4 guys that were supposed to be really wrestlers, and Dory had worked with the other 3, and then you had my dad there, and he worked my dad one night, and he said, I don't know how they're doing it here. He said, I didn't really look before I took the book over. He said, but you're the only one I can work with. So if Dory Funk Jr. says that to you, that to me, that's really got to mean something. I mean,
yes,
you know, from before that on, my dad and Dory was always like best of friends. I mean, and, you know, my dad would work with Dory in different places and everything. But I mean, I watched them have 4 or 5 matches that, you know, I'd put anybody up against them, and I wouldn't think they would be any better. I mean, it was just wrestling. I mean, wrestling for 30, 35, 40 minutes, just, I mean, not stopping, just wrestling going.
Yeah, that's cool. So Mr. Gilbert broke into the business in 1969, and we're going to jump ahead a little bit. Little Rock, Arkansas, February 23rd, 1971. Your dad wrestled Sputnik Monroe. What comes to mind when you hear the name Sputnik Monroe, guys?
Diamond Ring Cadillac man. Sputnik was one of the innovators. I mean, and Tommy can tell you more about this than I can, but I heard my dad tell a lot of stories and everything about Sputnik. But I mean, Sputnik, some people didn't like some of the stuff he done, and the other people loved it. But I mean, he was the first, I mean, to me, gimmick type guy that, I mean, you know, the diamond ring Cadillac man, Sputnik Monroe with the half black, half blonde hair, right? Tommy on each side. Wasn't that the deal, his hair deal, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, kind of two-tone deal and everything. But I mean, but he was really tough, right, Tommy?
Yeah, well, he hung with that on them, didn't he? Wasn't he down on Bill Street? I mean,
Well, he was the one when, you know, when they was trying to do the when the segregation stuff all started, when they was down. I was trying to think of the building that they was at, but you know, as far as the blacks sit in one section of it and the whites sit in another section. Well, Sputnik said, no, that's not right. And we see some people during those days, you know how people are. I mean, some people was for it, some people was against it and everything. But Sputnik was one of those that said, no, I'm not going to wrestle unless everybody can sit together. It was some kind of deal like that. I mean, he stood his stance, and I mean, he wound up winning. I mean, basically, I mean, he got what he wanted, but he was the first one that, you know, that I know ever heard of in this part of the country that done that.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Sputnik, yeah. I mean, he was back down Bill Street. I mean, like, and he'd walk that walk, talk the talk. I mean, he was, I mean, but he hung. That's where he hung and everything. I mean, he was, you know.
And Gene, if I'm not mistaken, Sputnik had a black wife. So I mean, it wasn't him just talking the talk. He actually, like Tommy said, he around town. I mean, that was what his beliefs was. And I mean, I think it was Norvell that he had with him a lot of the time. And I mean, I always loved Norvell. Norvell was always great and cool and everything. But I mean, Sputnik, like I said, my dad really liked Sputnik. I mean, but like I said, Sputnik was a tough, you know, like I said, during them days, I don't know who we could say on here that wasn't tough and everything, but I think my dad really liked him because he would speak his mind and you know, whatever he thought he would say. But like I said, he was the first kind of, to me, like gimmick type guy that, like I said, the diamond ring Cadillac man. If you said that in those days, Tommy, everybody knew who you was talking about, right?
Yeah. I mean, I met him 2 or 3 times in Memphis. You know, he come. I seen him. Well, he was with Norvell, and but him, like I say, Norvell. I was thinking about Norvell because I remember did he train him or were they partners?
They was partners. They was partners, but Norvell had just started about that time, I think, too.
His wing or something, I think.
Right, and he did and everything, and but it was I think they was a cool pairing, and I think they drew some money. And why I say I think they drew some money, freaking Sputnik, I always drew a bunch of money. And actually, I got to be on a card with him, and they said it was like 5 decades after the first match, which, Gene, you might know this, but like the first time him and Billy Wicks drew a ton of money, they told me, in this part of the world, in Tennessee and Kentucky and everywhere. But like in 93 or 92, 93, somewhere around there, they brought for one of the Memphis Memories shows, I think is what it was. They brought Sputnik and Billy Wicks both back in for a match, and they said that match would have been 5 decades worth of matches between them. But Sputnik was still that night, like Billy Wicks, one of his arms, he couldn't even like raise it, like I'm sure his rotator cuff or shoulder or something. Yeah. But now the other arm he could move. Well, Sputnik was telling him, I remember before they went to the ring that night, Sputnik was saying, hard way me, hit me hard as you can. And I was thinking, and at that point, both of them would have had to have been in their mid 70s or something. I mean, you could look up the year that I'm talking about, and you can find it, and we could know the age was. But what I'm saying, it probably mid 70s. But I remember before them going out, and I was thinking, when they booked it, I thought, now what does this mean to these people here right now? Because I remember Sputnik, but I didn't really remember Billy Wicks, but they told me he was really a big deal. Tommy, do you remember Billy Wicks?
Just the name. See, they was a little before me.
Well, they was way before you, but I thought you might have heard, just or seen maybe a TV like when you was a kid, seen Billy Wicks or anything. Do you ever remember?
No, I don't remember. I remember the name, but that's I was like, I don't know. I should know him. I should know him probably, but I sure don't ring no bell.
But Gene, do you remember kind of what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, I know, like I say, I'm more familiar with Sputnik than Billy Wicks, but I knew the name because, famously, they were one of the first matches that they were able to nearly fill a stadium there in Memphis. Like they had to go out of the regular building and put it over in a baseball stadium because they were drawing so many people. It was kind of like how Blassie and John Tolos did out in California back in the day.
Right. Well, yeah, that's kind of the thing that there's to me. But I know we're kind of getting off subject here. But my dad really loved Sputnik. I mean, he was, like when my dad would work with him. I mean, Sputnik was one of them guys. Like Tommy said. I mean, it didn't matter. He'd say hit him harder. It didn't matter if you hit him hard as you could. He'd want you to hit him harder. But he was a tough, and I mean, there wasn't nothing that he done that the people didn't believe because it was all. I mean, everything about it was real. And he was a tough guy.
Now, like you said, everybody in this era was tough guys, but these guys were exceptionally tough guys.
So right.
The next place we're talking about, May 28th, 1971 for Southeastern. Your dad goes to Chilhowie Park Amphitheater in Knoxville, Tennessee. He teams up with a gentleman I'm not real familiar with. We'll see if you guys recognize this name, but it's Tommy Gilbert and George Strickland taking on Ron and Don Wright, who were synonymous in that area for being tough guys.
Ron and Don Wright, I know very well as far as remembering, what their history. But now the Strickland, the Strickland name doesn't ring a bell with me. What about you, Tommy?
No, I remember Ron Don Wright. Don Wright, they go get the heat, and he's making people so mad. He pulled his false teeth out and gouged in the guy. But yeah, but they was, like you said, they was kid up in the Knoxville area. They was the team to go right. Yeah.
Oh yeah. If you wanted to be in a program, I mean a top program like a tag team program or something, you'd want to be wrestling the Wrights. I mean, if you want to make some money and draw money and everything, because they was top heels there for freaking like 3 or 4 decades, I think. I mean, and still today, if the older people you talk to up there, they still know it's the Wrights and Bob Orton Jr., Ronnie Garvin. It's kind of, those guys kind of stayed there for, I guess, forever, it seemed like, and everything. But the Wrights, Ron and Don, they was the top heels, right, Tommy?
Yeah. They pretty much. I mean, that's where they stayed pretty much the whole time. I don't really remember going nowhere else. I just always remember being in Knoxville.
Do we know, Gene? Do you know who the Strickland guy does?
I don't. I guess I need to research that name a little more. I couldn't find much on him, honestly.
Hey, but we didn't tell Tommy this. He did wrestle in Indianapolis and wrestled the Great Wojo, didn't he? Who was the Great Wojo?
Yeah, I forgot to tell you that. Yeah, the Great Wojo is one of the people you wrestled up in Indiana. Now, we talking about how you went to Indianapolis for WWA for Jerry Graham Jr.
The Great Wojo. Who is the Great Wojo, Gene? You know all this history.
It's short for Wojanitsky or something like that. Yeah, I was going to spring that on you on a future episode after I did a little more research. There's a few other matches. As soon as Dave Dynasty heard that one, he flooded my inbox with posters and matches. And I haven't gone through and watched them yet.
I done messed that up for you, hadn't Gene? I'm sorry about that.
No, that's fine. We'll come back to it in a future show. But so check this one out. July the 7th, 1971, at the Coliseum in Jackson, Tennessee. It's Tommy Gilbert and Herb Welch taking on the Von Brauners, Carl and Kurt.
Man, the Von Brauners, you talking about another tag team that was some heels, and during that time had heat. Tommy, those two guys was really over his heels, wasn't it?
That was, yeah, you ain't lying. Oh, God.
And I can't.
Hey, what was it, man? It's Saul Wydroff, right? Wasn't that the manager? Yeah, they had, people, and kind of like the Russians, you know how people don't like the Russians, them Germans, and they got heat too. Lord. And shoot, I can imagine the match Tommy had with them because them guys could go too.
And you said my dad's partner, Gene, was Buddy Fuller?
Herb Welch, yes, sir.
Or Herb Welch? Okay,
Herb
good
Welch.
deal. Man, I guarantee you, Herb always worked hard and everything, so I guarantee they had a heck of a match. And I wish we had numbers like attendance back in those days, but I'm sure we don't.
I know. Yeah, they just given the date and location on these. It'd be nice to know.
And everything. But no, I guarantee you that was right in my dad's wheelhouse, because that was another guy that liked to wrestle. And like I said, in those days, even the Germans could wrestle. The Germans or Russians or whatever he was doing, all those guys could. But man, I guarantee that great match and everything right here, being 30 miles from home from my dad. That's just getting out 30 minutes, a couple hours before the show started and riding right down there to Jackson and everything. And I was going to tell you what, you can get to the other dates, but there's one show there's a bunch of shows that I could tell you about, but one and I'll say if this is on your date list, do you have another show that my dad wrestled in, and I think it was in Knoxville, but it was a TV taping, and it was during a winter snowstorm, and the only people that could make it to TV for the hour TV was my dad, Jerry Lawler, Jim White, and Sam Bass for the whole TV. Wow. That's the four guys was there. Did you have that on your list, Gene?
I don't have that one listed.
Well, and the good deal is this is on. You can find this on YouTube, and man, it is some of the coolest stuff. My dad wrestles in the first match. They do like a promo first with Lawler, White, and Bass, I think, and then they go to the back. Then they do a promo with my dad, and then the first match is my dad against I think it's my dad against Lawler, and they go for a good long time, and then I think my dad might actually beat Lawler. My dad beats Lawler, White won, and then they come back out and say, well, the other one's going to challenge you. But the commentator, and my dad he wrestles that guy. So now there's just, like I said, those four guys are the only four guys that can make a TV. It's a snowstorm. And I told my dad, I said, how did y'all make it? He said, because we knew we had to go. But anyway, so they're the only four there for the whole TV, the whole hour TV. So my dad wrestles Lawler, he wrestles White, and they wind up with the guy that does the commentary. You got to listen to this, Gene, and put it on something. He says every time, like my dad will hit one of them or something, he'll say, that's a whop 'em to the belly punch by Gilbert. And when Lawler or Jim White hits my dad, he'll say, that's a whop 'em. It was something like whop 'em to the belly. But it's some of the funniest Southern type stuff that you've ever heard. But the only four on TV was those four was my dad, Lawler, Jim White, Sam Bass, and the commentator. That was the whole TV. You talking about a cool, which like I said, the footage is out there. I was saying it, people.
It is. I've seen some of that, and we will actually splice some of that audio into the end of this episode. So stick around, folks. You're going to hear a little bit of what Doug was talking about right there at the end of the show. We'll put some of that in.
And is that not cool? Like I said, maybe it ain't whop 'em, but it's something just funny as can be, Tommy. You die laughing when you hear this. But to me, I thought it was cool because I watched the whole show. I thought it was cool that it wasn't but those four guys there. And I thought, Sam, I always loved Sam and as good workers as Lawler and Jim White was, and my dad to be the only ones there. I thought that was pretty cool.
Well, if you're going to have four show up to do it, that's the four to do it. That's for sure, because they all big time.
And you're going to have to keep action in the ring because back in those days, it's not like you could put a bunch of pre-tape stuff out because they didn't have that back then. They were just airing live matches,
Absolutely not. And you got to realize what I'm talking about. This was in a studio, a studio setting is when, like I said, Jen can look at it. Which time me and you see it, look at it sometime. But it's really cool. I liked it. I thought it was really neat.
Yeah, we'll share it. We'll share the video to the Facebook page as well, so everybody can check that out. So,
and now there's one other story before we get back to your dates,
yeah.
Gene. There was my dad was leaving Tupelo. Now this is just a funny story. It ain't so much about the match or a match or nothing. But it's like stuff I tell you I like to talk about that I think's funny. And at this point this night, I'm sure they didn't think this was funny. But my dad and Eddie Marlin and Rocky Johnson had just worked in Tupelo, Mississippi. And they left the building and they stopped, I guess, at the local liquor store and got them some, what was it, Tommy? Wasn't it gin that they mixed with their...
they mix that Lipton tea. Lipton tea is what it was.
Lipton tea and gin. Now, I never thought this. And my dad told me one time when I asked him about this, he said Lipton tea, and then he said 2 Gatorade. If you put it in Gatorade, something about it would hit you quicker. And everything. So now, look, my dad, Eddie Marlin, Rocky Johnson. So this has got to be 73, 4, somewhere through there. So they going down the road and they just stopped and got their gin and they drank, and all of a sudden blue lights. Well, they pull them over. Well, they didn't get nobody for DUI or nothing back then, but they had an open bottle. Well, I guess the cops didn't like them too much, and 72, 3, whatever it was, 2 white guys and a black guy together. They wasn't too sure about them and everything anyway. So they wound up taking them 3, took all 3 of them to jail. But here's the thing. Eddie Marlin had the town money in a bag in the trunk of his car. So some of the police officers did like them, when they got there and they seen who it was and everything, as Eddie Marlin, my dad, Rocky Johnson. So they took them to jail, but then they let them pay to get out. But now you don't think that wouldn't have been a funny story? We talk about what the different days and what people have done and what I've done, what Tommy's done, what this guy's done and everything. But I laughed at my dad. He told me that story one night, and I said, I bet y'all three was ready, wasn't y'all? And he told me that story. I thought that was pretty funny.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade, and why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia, the podcast that dives into wrestling history. Hey, wrestling fans, I'm Dave Dynasty, and if you enjoy podcasts that are knowledgeable and history-driven, then Wrestling Nostalgia is for you. With great guests and fun interviews, there are over 200 episodes in our archives. We chat with several first-time guests and often cover topics not discussed on other podcasts. Look up Wrestling Nostalgia on your favorite podcast platform and visit all of our links at linktree/WrestlePod. That is linktr.ee/RASSLEPOD. And remember, wherever you go, whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.
Now, a lot of people listening to this are going to, be people who mainly watched in you guys' era in the 80s and the 90s, and they just kind of know Eddie Marlin as Matchmaker Eddie Marlin, coming out here now. But him and your dad was a big tag team in the day, right?
Oh, yeah, that's when him and my dad was the tag champs. And Eddie was really over. Eddie was.
They was over as a tag team. They dropped big money in Memphis and Louisville, Evansville, all down. They dropped money in as the tag champions because that's as a matter of fact. I probably might have said it before, but I was probably about 15. I was going to Evansville, Indiana with Tommy and Eddie. And as we're going up the road, Eddie Marlin's driving, Tommy's on the passenger side, and I'm sitting in the back seat. And they just talking to me and messing with me a little bit. And all of a sudden, we pass the bounty hunters. Tommy said, "Slow down." Anyway, Eddie Marlin slowed the car down, and Tommy started shooting bird back, and I kept sliding down in that seat. Because I done still was thinking about Lou Thesz when I was little. Now then I'm thinking, this shit's really, really thinking to fight here. I said, oh, yeah. Yeah. But anyway, but for a long time, I never, if I got the business, I never knew. That's just a couple of things, and that's how they handled it. I don't know if Tommy and Eddie had told them they had me with them early or something, or just messing with me. No, or they just, but that's, but they always had a good time on the road. But see, they came, I bought the shit out of it. I thought, damn.
And I guarantee you, I don't think they probably said nothing about having you with them, Tommy. I think they just had a good time on the road, kind of like we did. We all just kind of done a little different and done our own things. But yeah, Gene, like Tommy said, my dad for like 6 to 8 years, him and Eddie Marlin was partners and tag champs on and off in here. And they did draw a lot of money. It was over as a babyface tag team.
Yeah, that's what I've always heard. That was kind of what I knew Eddie Marlin for, as far as like his wrestling career, was being tag team champions with Tommy Gilbert.
Yeah, that's what I told Eddie Marlin. That's why my dad had to have so many back surgeries for carrying his butt for so many years. Hey, he didn't think that was funny very much.
I bet he didn't. I think I remember y'all saying that on TV around 88 or so, too, whenever y'all are out there.
Oh, yeah. I said it quite a few times, but I'd say it at some of the spot shows, too. Tommy would laugh. I'd tell Eddie Marlin on the microphone, I said, my dad's back wouldn't be hurting if it wasn't carrying you around forever. Yeah, that got over about as good as it did make Lawler tell me called Dundee old on TV.
So here's one from 72, February 8th, 1972. Now check out this team. It's Dennis Hall, Jackie Fargo, and Tommy Gilbert, and they're taking on the interns, which is Jim Starr and Tom Andrews, along with Dr. Ken Ramey, who's actually in the match, 6-man tag team match in Louisville, Kentucky. Boy, don't you know that one drew some money.
Well, that was cool. And you know what? My dad really liked that Dennis Hall. And you said Fargo was their partner also? Is that what you said? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and my dad loved Jackie. Jackie was just, if you didn't like Jackie, you just didn't like nothing. Jackie was like the coolest. And stuff that he said got over with me so much. Like he'd tell, Lawler would drive Jackie around when Lawler started, right? And Lawler told me Jackie told him they'd go pull up somewhere and he'd say, "Slow down." And Lawler would say, "Why?" And he said, "Because let me duck down. I don't want people to see me in this piece of shit car of yours." but I mean, but Jackie was just, Jackie, you can ask Tommy can tell you stories about Jackie, but Jackie was great. But I guarantee you, with Jackie, my dad, and like I said, my dad was always a big fan of Dennis Hall. So I think he had to have been a really good wrestler. Which, Tommy, was you around Dennis Hall?
Yeah. Dennis, I knew Dennis, because remember I went over and worked. I went to work for Nick. Well, Dennis working over there. But he was another tough one too. Dennis Hall was tough, but he could work. I mean, he was, I met him over on Nick Goodish's side. That's when they had split up. And but yeah, Dennis was, real good,
So this is maybe a dumb question, but I always wondered this. Dennis Hall, the wrestler, is that the same Dennis Hall of Dennis Hall's Auto Salvage that they advertised every week during Memphis wrestling for years and years and years? Did he go on to own that, or is that two different people?
I think that was two different people, but now I could be wrong, but I was going to tell you this. Now, Dennis wound up after he kind of retired from working. He worked for a truck. He wasn't a dispatcher, but he worked for like a big trucking lines here in Jackson, Tennessee. So, I mean, he was close to us as far as home, you know what I mean? Gotcha. And my dad still always talked to him a lot and everything, but I don't think that was what you're talking about.
I didn't think it was. I think it was probably somebody just capitalizing on the name because they knew wrestling fans recognized the name, but I was just curious.
Right.
So to touch on something you mentioned before, I got the notes here. In March and April of 1974, your dad had a series of 9 matches with Lou Thesz for the NWA Southern Junior Heavyweight title, with the title changing hands at least 3 times back and forth between them. Not to mention several tag team matches, non-title matches as well. So like you said at the beginning, Doug, if Lou Thesz came to town, a lot of the time he was going to be wrestling Tommy Gilbert. And
yeah, that was, and like I said, and it's no knock against anybody else or anything, but it was just, like I said, my dad was Jarrett's guy, that as far as if guys like that come in, that my dad was the guy for that role. That was kind of his. I mean, that was his background and his training. And I'm not saying the other guys couldn't have done it, but they didn't want to do it. They'd rather work against other people that was in the territory or that they brought in, that they didn't have to work that style. And I mean, a lot of people just, they've got what they want to do, and they've got one style of a match. And I'm not saying the guys couldn't have done it. They could have done it. I mean, they could have worked. I mean, there was numerous ones of them that could have done it. But like I said, Jarrett knew who he thought would be good. And this was one thing that, I'd never heard anybody but my dad say this. And that Lou Thesz said, because he would always come in a territory for a week and then leave. Well, he stayed here for a couple of weeks. And he told my dad said he'd come over there that second week that him and my dad was working, and said, Tommy, you're going to have to help me out. And that really, made my dad feel good. My dad said, well, what do you mean, Lou? What do you need? He thought he needed help with something that, not wrestling, but something else. And Lou said, well, I go to a different territory every week. Said, I don't stay for weeks at a time anywhere. He said, well, what do you want to do tonight? It was just like his second week in the territory. And and if you think about it and you look at dates and stuff, Lou did always, he wouldn't stay anywhere. But if his territory is a week around a loop, then he was gone to another one. And he did travel all over. And man, you could tell when my dad was telling me this story that it made him happy. And my dad said, well, Lou, we do whatever you want to do. And he said, no, Tommy. He said, we done my stuff last week. Now we got to do something different. Tell me a different way you want to start this, or how you want to have this match. And man, you could tell, like what I'm saying, when my dad was telling me that, I could tell it, it really tickled him to death that Lou would ask him for his advice on how to start something. And then my dad said they had a great freaking match, that second week around also, and it was different than the first. It wasn't the same type deal. It was a whole different match. So I thought that was really cool.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Lou Thesz is one of the greatest world champions of all time, one of the most highly regarded wrestlers. And so for him to, want to work with your dad and then value his opinion and have him call the match, I mean,
right. Well, that's what my dad thought, because my dad thought, he was the toughest dude in wrestling. And I mean, and for us three, me and you and Tommy, to sit on here, I'm not one to say at that time he might not have been the toughest guy in wrestling through those years, right, Tommy?
Yeah, he had a reputation for that. I mean, when I met him, he was older, but I heard back in the day, man, he was pretty doggone tough.
And see, that was the thing. And you go back to NWA, the AWA, the different organizations. The thing about the NWA, and a lot of people will say it, they wanted to make sure that their world champion, that that it didn't matter who come up to them or whatever, that they couldn't beat their champion. I mean, it didn't matter anybody in the world could challenge them, which that's what I'm glad we've got a guy on here that was the NWA world champion. That means he could beat everybody in the world at that time, man.
That's right. They knew he wasn't going to take that belt off Tommy if Tommy didn't want him.
Hey, you ain't kidding. Tommy could run in them days.
I was about to say, lucky for Harley that Tommy was willing to drop it back, right?
There you go.
So in 1975, your dad heads out to Texas. He ends up working in All Japan, but he doesn't do it as Tommy Gilbert. We teased this last week. It's Johnny Starr. Do you have any insight into how we come about being Johnny Starr in Texas and All Japan?
Yeah, you're gonna laugh. Gene, you remember Gary Young?
Yeah.
They called him. It wasn't Johnny Starr. It was like Jim Starr or something. If we look back, we can find out. But what had happened, they'd already booked like 3 weeks or a month ahead, and my dad was coming in to work as Tommy Gilbert. But then that Gary done something that they fired him, just something that they wouldn't tolerate. They fired him, and they called my dad and said, "Come on in 3 weeks earlier." Well, they didn't put out the advertisement and everything, and had that Star name. And when my dad got there, his name wasn't on anything, which he wasn't supposed to start for a month. And they said, "Well, let's just call you Johnny Starr." So we've already got the Star. And so they just, on the posters, it had that other name that Gary Young was using. So they just stuck with the Johnny Starr, and which, my dad didn't care, just as long as he was working and getting paid and everything. Like I said, he wound up during that, his tenure there in Amarillo and the territory for the Funks, he worked as Johnny Starr. Then, they was also booking Japan. They would, the Funks would openly say this, that like their territory was Amarillo, but also their territory was Japan. That they pretty much run it, and they did, and everything. But my dad worked for them in Japan for All Japan, and he worked for them at Amarillo. And then during that time also was he worked against Terry a whole lot. Now, Terry told me this a whole lot. He said, "Doug, people don't realize how much your dad helped me," and which I never realized that till Terry told me that. And he's left me messages with how much, he thought of Eddie. And he's talked to me about also how much he thought of Eddie and how much he thought of my dad, and how people didn't know how much my dad had really taught him out there when my dad was out there. So to me, that was really, really cool and everything. But also while my dad was out there was when the deal I was telling you about, the Paradise Alley movie. I didn't know if you or Tommy had ever saw that or even heard it mentioned. But Funk he got to take like 3 or 4 guys with him when he'd done that and everything. And that was with Sylvester Stallone. And one of the guys he took with him was my dad. So, that told me right there, he did think a lot of my dad and everything. But he told me, he said he thought the world of my dad because people didn't know how much my dad had helped him. And then I'd seen that there's a couple matches that we can get. I think there's 2 matches I've seen from out there with him and my dad that they go a good length of time in them and everything. And man, they're just really good wrestling matches with my dad and Terry.
I'll have to look those up.
Subject, but I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm probably about one of the only guys that I wrestled with Tommy Gilbert, and I wrestled against him. I wrestled with Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, and I wrestled against him, and I wrestled against Dougie, and wrestled against him. You know, I mean, all you know, the whole family.
Well, yeah, and
I thought about that. That's pretty doggone cool too.
yeah,
Tommy taught me a lot when I started. I mean, like that boxing match, he educated me real good that night.
And I'm trying to think, Tommy. I would really have to think hard here and look back through a lot of stuff, but I can't think of anybody that was. Well, there wasn't another person that was been tag team champions with all three of us, but you. I mean, you tag champions with my dad. You tag champions with Eddie. You've been multiple time tag champions with myself, and there's nobody else. You're the only one on that list.
That's pretty cool. I was just thinking about that. That's pretty cool.
I like it. That's awesome.
That's
so yeah.
You can ask somebody.
Yeah, that's gonna be that can be a trivia question for sure one of these days when you get the opportunity to throw that out there. So out in Texas, your dad worked with guys like Scott Casey, Black Gordman, Don Fargo, Killer Tim Brooks, Ray Stevens.
And Gene, what do you know about Killer Tim Brooks? My dad would tell me about working with him. Man, I seen a lot of his stuff, and man, I loved his stuff. Which I mean, Ray Stevens also, but as far as the names you just mentioned, Tommy, you was around Killer Brooks, someone.
Brooks, he came to Atlanta, and he was met old school like your dad. I mean, it taught me, but he wasn't as like. Right, I mean, he just worked with you,
right?
Yeah, and wasn't Killer Carl Cox out there too?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so. Around this time,
that's another tough one right there. I'm sure Tommy wrestled him many times. I wrestled him a couple of times in Atlanta when I was there. But when you talk about guys, he had that crazy gimmick. I mean,
right.
You know, it just God, just talk about Tommy and all that stuff, bring back a lot of memories and a lot of names. You know, you don't think about all the time. It's pretty cool.
What about Gene? Did you say Ricky? Go over that list one more time if you don't mind.
Scott Casey, Black Gordman, Don Fargo, Killer Brooks, Ray Stevens, and Bobby Jaggers.
Yeah,
and then after he went to Japan, when he came back, he feuded with the Poffos, and he had several matches with a young man named Frank Goodish, who would go on to become Bruiser Brody.
Yeah, my dad really liked Frank, really liked Brody. I've seen a lot of potential in him, and which y'all know what he wound up doing. I mean, wound up being a great athlete and everything. But my dad, I also remember him talking about, in which, I mean, you know, Ray Stevens was great. Also, all those guys you said, I'm sure, was great. But I remember my dad talking about working a few matches with Ricky Romero. Tommy, was you ever around Ricky
No,
Romero?
I was never around him.
Well, my dad said that was like, I mean, and for my dad to say this, he said, you might as well just been, he said, you know, as far as wrestling, it wasn't, I mean, he wrestled a little bit, but he said it was about like a street fight being in, you know, when you was wrestling and everything. But I mean, all them guys out there, that was back when, you know, and I mean, we still want to, and all the time during, I think, mine and Tommy's career, we didn't want nothing to look bad and everything, but I'd ask different people at different times. I'd say, shoot, what's the, you know, I want everybody to believe everything, and I don't mind. I never minded anything to be stiff, and I was a little stiff, you know, sometimes, a lot of the time probably, but not to hurt anybody. But during those days, those guys, I don't see how they didn't hurt each other. I mean, some of the stuff that was done. Did you, Tommy?
Yeah, I mean, because they would just, you know, like he said, like a lot of guys like to come to Memphis because it wasn't that rugged, you know. I mean, like you said, Tommy, you know, a lot of guys like Jackie. I mean, Jackie was tough, don't get me wrong, but he was more into that show. You know, Jackie was an entertainer. You know, I mean, he had fun hair, and where it's Tommy, I mean, Tommy looked forward to wrestling Terry Funk, and Jackie may have, but Jackie just like, Terry and them, shit, I wrestled Terry before he retired. That's some going steel, just as rugged and solid. And I'm thinking, damn, you're beating my socks off, man. But that's just the way they work.
But
Till they gone, that's what they believed, and that's the way they did. I mean,
yeah,
no different. That's like I said that night in Evansville, boy. He suckered me in on that boxing match. That's no lesson he taught me. Yeah, Tommy taught me a few, but yeah, he'd say, "Come on." Arms dropped down. He beat the dog, Steve.
But his whole belief, Gene, was always, and this is what killed me and everything. But I mean, Tommy's always been great at it. Also, I mean, my dad was always in shape. But now, if you didn't know that, and if you just looked at him and you watched him smoke a pack of cigarettes a day or 2 packs of cigarettes a day, you'd look at him and think, well, oh, I can do what I want with this guy, or I might can do this. But then you get in the ring, my dad's freaking cardio and stuff and being in shape. I mean, it wasn't nothing. I don't guess it would have mattered if he smoked a carton of cigarettes a day, because that didn't matter once he got in the ring. I mean, he could go. I mean, he could, but that was, I mean, that was his thing. He thought if you need to go 60 minutes, you should be able to go 60 minutes. If you need to go longer than that, you should be able to go. And there was no excuse for you not to be able to go.
And you figured they was probably going, 30, especially in them smaller towns, they'd go 30 minutes. You wrestle twice. When I started,
Yeah.
First match, I wrestled the first match against Doug, and then we'd be back and the other two would wrestle in a single match, and then they'd have a third match, and then we'd be back in the tag match in the fourth. And you'd go Tommy, of course, Tommy, like Doug said, I mean, he could go, just soon go an hour, whereas he had 30. And most of the time, they were doing 30 at least, I mean, it wasn't 12 matches on the card to where you didn't have to go 15 minutes. I mean, they put the time in and did it 5, 6, 7 days a week. I mean, they was on the road every night. And you think about it, and a lot of that stuff was back. The interstates wasn't the interstate. I mean, they did miles. They did 200 hard. And they'd get there and wrestle for 30 minutes and head on to the next town or go home and then head back. I mean, you figure, I mean, they were tough.
Yeah, and Gene, you look on some of those posters, like Tommy said, there's not but 3 matches. You'd have like 3 singles matches, then them 3 single matches come back in a 6-man maybe at the for the final match. So that tells you what it was.
Absolutely. Now, here's a match that I bet didn't go 30 minutes. Now, you guys tell me once you hear this. I'm having trouble even picturing this match. January 3rd, 1977, Tommy Gilbert defeats Dr. Frank, a.k.a. Ken Dillinger, at an event in Memphis, Tennessee. I know the name, and I've seen some like TV segments with Dr. Frank, but I never actually saw him wrestle. How do you think that match went, and how was Dr. Frank in the ring, as best you recollect?
You know what? As fun as this sounds, the match probably on these days, it probably wouldn't go but 2 minutes, but they probably went 10, 12 or something like that as far as stretching out and making it good. But remember, you do remember Dr. Frank, right? Gene, in the box.
Oh, yeah.
You remember Lawler bringing the box out and unlocking the deal and letting Dr. Frank out. But, I mean, all those gimmick like that stuff, they used it, got as much out of it as they could. And that Dr. Frank deal, it lasted a little bit. And I mean, it was actually good. But I mean, back then, now, these days, somebody would laugh or something, but back then it was like scary. It was like, spooky type deal when you had somebody in a box and you come out and you had a lock on it and you unlock the lock and say, hold on a second here, and to kind of control the guy. But I mean, I don't remember exactly the whole match or anything, but I just remember that. What year was that, team?
77. January
77. So I'd have been 8 years old.
You say that Dillinger?
Yeah, Ken Dillinger's who they say that was under the mask.
I don't remember Dr. Frank so much, but I remember Ken Dillinger. And I bet him and Tommy did have a good match. He could work.
Yeah. And back then, Gene, they would make those, I don't want to say make, but they had those characters to kind of wrestle, but like monsters, you know what I'm saying? I mean, but work like, but I mean, not like these days type deal, but like, you know, like, I mean, Lawler would tell them to do, like, be like, you know, be.
I was like, I saw clips of Dr. Frank, and he was, you know, he was moving like Frankenstein the movie, and he was choking.
Right. And so that was
him to do.
Exactly. And that was one of, I mean, and I guarantee you, Lawler told him exactly how he wanted him to do it. And he had in his mind how he wanted him to do it. And I guarantee you that's how they done it. But I mean, it was cool. I mean, you know, that you come up with your own different gimmicks and everything. And I mean, Lawler's always been one of the greatest at that. I mean, you can ask Tommy. I mean, he's come up with a million different ones.
And people got to put context to that, though. If you think back to that day where you saw, like you guys were, the points you guys were just making, where you had saw the straight up wrestler types having 20, 30-minute wrestling matches. And then you mix that up with a Dr. Frank coming out there. It's kind of fun. It kind of breaks things up, and it's different. You know?
It goes back to Gene having something for everybody. And I mean, like I said, you know, if you got 5 or 6 just amateur type wrestlers, then you got 4 or 5 entertainers, then you got your Dr. Franks and your Freddie type deals and everything. But like I said, I mean, look, I mean, even let's go back to Kamala. What about that? What about the video when you first saw Kamala walking through the jungle through
the
Jerry
jungles of
Jarrett's,
Henderson?
through Jerry Jarrett's jungle in his backyard from where was he supposed to be from?
Deepest, darkest Africa, Uganda.
Yeah, and Tommy had been right back there working on the farm where he was walking through.
They told me to get out. They told me to get out of the video.
You got to kill it. They know you're not in Africa, Tommy. Get out of the way.
So I could get on TV. They said, "Get the hell out of here."
but what I'm saying is just ideas and gimmicks like that. But I mean, you know, you go to all the different ones, and I mean, all the, you know, I mean, different gimmicks and different ideas and stuff that went on to draw money different places. I mean, you know, bukus of money.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other episode we can do at some point where
Right.
Tommy, he worked out in Kansas City too, right?
He sure did. He worked in Kansas City for Bob Geigel and Pat O'Connor, Bob Geigel. That's where the you know, the NWA, if you want to get back to the roots of it, you go back to Kansas City and St. Louis. I mean, and you know, the Funks had a big part in it, but like when we was on the phone with Jerry Briscoe, Jerry kind of said, we was talking about Gene about Kansas City and me saying, you know, wasn't there a lot of stroke out there? And he said, yeah, there was a lot of stroke. And what did he say? Him and his brother would go out there. What did he say? It wasn't because he wanted to go out there, but they wanted to book him out there, and they put the tag titles on them. And he said, why? Tommy, Jerry said, I don't know why they're putting the tag titles on us for. I didn't really want to go back.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a lot of like the, you know, NWA influence with, I mean, you know, with Bob Geigel and Pat O'Connor and those guys. They was, you know, they was really stout in all that.
Yeah, we're running low on time, so I want to come back and revisit this. You know, it doesn't have to be your dad's birthday for us to talk about his career. And I just love talking about these different matches because it gives you guys a chance to talk about some of these guys that I don't know necessarily would come up. But now here's a match I want us to talk about before we end this show. And I think this is going to be a good one to kind of to wrap up on. And like I say, we'll look at some more of these in the future. We'll get out to Kansas City and we'll talk about once he got to teaming with Eddie and different things. But on June 19th, 1977, Mr. Tommy Gilbert and Mr. Tommy Rich won the Southern Tag Team titles from the Bicentennial Kings, Dennis Condrey and Phil Hickerson, right there at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis, Tennessee.
Yes, sir. See, that's what I made. Say, I didn't know where we wanted to be at. Yeah, but hey, you talk about some guys that can work, man. All I had to do is sit back and just kind of all I had to do was listen, because they did, Tommy and Dennis and Phil, they were over. They were bad heels, and we got over as a babyface. That's where Tommy kind of took me under his wing there too. I mean, that was kind of the gimmick, but like I said, Tommy taught me a lot, just about wrestling itself, before I got business, I worked at the Shell gas. Anyway, I just remember Tommy, he'd come in sometime and I'd be working the night shift or something, wouldn't be nobody there. I'd go over and talk to Tommy, and he'd be going to Lexington, but he'd always take the time to sit and talk with me 20, 30 minutes. He'd say, well, I got to hit the road. And it wouldn't matter, he'd get in the car and head to the house.
And here's the thing, Gene, everybody's always put over Tommy, and Tommy's always been such a great, as far as babyface, as far as selling and everything. But my dad, one of his big things was my dad loved selling and everything, and was a great seller and everything. But my dad, he'd always say, and he'd tell me, as far as if he's going to be a great worker, it didn't matter if it was whatever anybody needed. You'd be like a utility guy. What you need to be a good heel, you need to be a good baby face, you need to be a good baby face that can sell and everything. As far as being a great worker, you need to be, if anybody needed anything, you need to be able to do it. And to me, that was his version of being a consummate professional. And I think that tells you what you need to know about my dad. And my dad was just a great guy. He, as far as for the business, he would fight for the business at the drop of a hat.
Absolutely. And he was a great wrestler. Like I said, we'll talk about his time maybe in Central States, Puerto Rico. He did some masked gimmicks we'll talk about in the future. Freddie being amongst them.
He was in Canada. Have we said anything about him being in Canada, Gene?
No, we haven't talked about that. I know I've got some results in here, but we hadn't touched on it here.
Yeah, we'll get into that on a future episode sometime or other. And I'm sure Tommy's got a few other stories he could probably tell, and I do too.
And a lot of people talk about what a great job he did as a referee for Bill Watts in the UWF during that time period.
Yeah, he did. I thought he really did. And he helped Eddie a lot down there also and everything. And that was a good time that we all got to spend time together and everything. But there's just so much different stuff that I could go to that I remember, as far as, and as far as the stuff like when I come back here from Watts and me and him teamed up and everything. To me, that was some of the coolest times of my career and everything. Just getting, like I said, my dad was just such a phenomenal wrestler. And it goes back, I think, to the way he was trained and probably the way he was brought up, trained and taught to, like Tommy said before, we was taught to keep our mouth shut. And if somebody, wanted to say something, we'd say something. But other than that, keep your mouth shut to your ass and everything when you started.
I got a chance to be around him a little bit, like around 1999. He came to Corinth to the CWA there where I was at. And you were there and your dad came in and you guys were, I think were feuding with Brickhouse Brown. But I just remember sitting against the wall listening to your dad and Don Bass tell old stories. And it was just great sitting there listening to all the stuff those guys had done. It was just really interesting.
Well, as strange as this is, nobody would think that Don Bass come out of the same wrestling school as my dad, but he actually did.
Really? See, I didn't know that.
But as far as working,
no,
and everything, you wouldn't think that, would you, Tommy?
No, yeah.
That's somebody else we're going to talk about in the future. Don Bass, the man of 1,000 masks. Mil Mascaris was the man of 1,000 masks from Mexico, and Don Bass was the man of 1,000 masks from Greasy Corner, Arkansas. So,
we used to laugh and say anytime they'd say a mystery partner. That was the kicker. At TV, look, me and Brian or Tommy, we'd be around, and anytime they didn't have somebody that they'd already lined up, if they was trying to get somebody, they'd put that up there, such and such and a mystery partner, and we would all look at each other and say, Don Bass.
We're doing that 93 show, USWA, right now, and you can tell whenever somebody doesn't show up, the Rock and Roll Phantom is showing up at 93 just randomly.
Right. Well, that's it. That's who we're saying. Rock and Roll Phantom, Don Bass. It's going to be Don Bass. We pop and everything. But hey, listen, Gene, we went over this, but everybody that's listening, we appreciate you listening. Rate, review, and subscribe, whatever platform you're listening on, whatever Comic Cons, Celeb Cons, parties, whatever you might want Tommy or myself at, and for us to have a good time, good weekend. If you want any pro wrestling tees, shirts, Memphis Mafia shirts, they've got them. Gene's got a store that's got her stuff on. Anything you guys would want, like I said, we got still 1,000 more stories about my dad and about Tommy and myself, and we might even have a few stories about Gene.
You never know, but thank you all for joining us. It was a pleasure getting to talk about the great Tommy Gilbert here, celebrating his birthday that just took place on January the 15th. And don't forget, you can catch these guys coming up February 1st, Wynne, Arkansas. March the 1st, they will be in the daytime. They will be at the Jackson Comic Con in Jackson, Tennessee. That evening, they're going to be wrestling in Blytheville, Arkansas. So make sure you check out the Facebook page where you can get all the details of all these shows.
Yeah, and hey, me and Tommy are going to be signing pictures, taking pictures with people, signing shirts, signing whatever you want, whatever you got out there that you want to bring. You bring to Jackson to the Carl Perkins Civic Center. We'll be there from about, I think it's 9 a.m. to like 5 p.m. and everything. Come on out and see us, and me and Tommy will sign, take pictures with you, whatever you need. And then like Gene said, Tommy's got me hungry now. I'm going to Blytheville, Arkansas that night and wrestling. We're going to be in a big tag team match over there. But listen, hey, thanks everybody for listening. And I love talking about my dad, and I love talking about Tommy's career and everything else. But listen, hey, thanks everybody for listening, and peace. We're out.
Now, go up here. What is you want, Tommy?
I don't want the match like that. Make them two get back in the dressing room. Bring Sam back out.
You want Sam back?
We'll finish it right here in the middle of the ring.
You didn't win anything. Get in that. Well, now, wait a minute here. Well, he doesn't want the match that way.
Just get either one of them back in here and that'll get in the ring.
He says he wants either one of you. Not
either one of us. We just win.
Well, all right. He's man enough to want you. Won't you get up there?
You get out of there, boy. You done been beat. We got somebody else to wrestle. Get him out.
What, are you chicken?
Will you accept the match with him? Why should I accept the match with him? I beat him last night. We got somebody else to wrestle. Get him out of there. You're chicken.
I believe you're the one that's chicken. I believe you're the one that's chicken, brother.
Oh, man wants you in the ring.
Well, you don't want me. You're yellow.
Well, yeah, he wants you. He wants you up there right now. All right, Lawler.
Look, we need to give Tommy a little bit of a rest. Wait a minute.
Well, we can give him a rest.
Will you accept? Will you take command?
All right, now here comes Bass slipping in here. Okay, now you're going to accept this match with Gilbert. He's issued you a challenge.
You ask him again. I don't think he wants to.
Do you want this man?
Either one of them. I don't care which one gets.
Either one of you. Either one of you. All right, Lawler's going in there. Looks like he's going to do it right now. So, there goes. Watch Gilbert. Gilbert going after Jerry Lawler. Pointed on him. There goes Lawler in there. Catching him. Wipe your head off hold. Tommy don't need any rest. He's going after Jerry Lawler, and Jerry Lawler wants some mercy. Gilbert now going after him hot and heavy. A body flip and a high in the air with Jerry Lawler. Gilbert says, all right, I'm going to teach you to interfere with my matches. And that's exactly what's happened. Lawler now all the way out of the ring here, out on the concrete. And Gilbert wants some more of him. Lawler now trying to get back in there. Gilbert waiting on him. Lawler now wanting to shake hands. He wants mercy. And I don't believe he's going to get it. So it's Jay Lawler and Tommy Gilbert, a continuation practically of the first match. And another work your head off hold here, and another one. And down goes Jay Lawler. Looks like a tree falling. One, and he rolls Tommy Gilbert off. And Jim White comes in to help out again. I believe he's handed him something. He has handed him a chain. And now here's the chain by Lawler. And time has run out. Time has run out here on this match. And Jerry Lawler has lost it. Tommy Gilbert had won it by virtue of winning the first fall. And Jim White comes in to talk with Lawler about it. He doesn't understand it.
Before we get out of here, I just want to take a moment to remind everyone, if you have an upcoming wrestling show, autograph signing, collector show, Comic-Con, or any event or booking that you would like to inquire about the services of Dangerous Doug Gilbert and or Tommy Wildfire Rich, just send us an email at douggilbertpodcast@outlook.com, and someone will get back to you as soon as possible to get more information on your event and do the best we can to make that happen. Also, if you are interested in advertising your event, your business, your product to the listeners of Dangerous Conversations, as well as to promote your event, business, or product across all our social media platforms, you can send that inquiry to douggilbertpodcast@outlook.com. We would love to work together with you to get that out there to the listeners of Dangerous Conversations. Remember to check out douggilbertpodcast.com. There you can find links to all things related to this podcast, as well as Doug and Tommy themselves. You'll find a link to the Dangerous Conversations Facebook page and the Dangerous Conversations Twitter, now known as X. And we're always posting content daily, involving the Gilbert family, Tommy Rich, all sorts of things from their career. We got magazine articles, videos, pictures, you name it. We're posting new content every single day. Make sure you follow so you don't miss out on any of that. Plus, you can follow Doug and Tommy's personal Facebook pages on there. Dangerous Doug Gilbert. You can search that on Facebook. You can also search Tommy Wildfire Rich. They both have Facebook pages. And Doug does have an X page as well, and you can follow them there. But if you really want to help support, you can go to the Gilbert Family Pro Wrestling Tees store, which there's a link to there on the douggilbertpodcast.com. And you can find t-shirts of Doug, Eddie, and their famous father, Tommy Gilbert, as well. Also, Tommy Rich is going to be having some t-shirts coming up very soon. Follow him on Facebook. We'll be talking about him here. But look for some cool new Tommy Wildfire Rich t-shirts coming out soon that you can partake in as well. Also, if you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on the platform of your choice. It would really help us in building up the podcast for the future. Plus, it helps us know what you like, what you don't like, where we need to take this podcast moving forward. Also, if you want to see a whole bunch of matches, promos, and angles, a lot of the ones that you're going to hear us talk about on this very podcast, you can go and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@RetroWrestlingArchive. Of course, it's linked right there at douggilbertpodcast.com, and you will find a ton of matches featuring Eddie Gilbert, Tommy Gilbert, Doug Gilbert, Tommy Wildfire Rich. There's playlists of all them that feature hundreds of matches of each of them. So make sure you go check that out. And not just of them, there are thousands, literally, at this point, of videos from wrestling from across the territory days, you name it. If we don't have the video uploaded to our channel, we at least have organized you a playlist of just about every territory, every show that's out there. You can find it in one convenient location there on YouTube at the Retro Wrestling Archive. Plus, don't forget, you can find all things related to my popular Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast at uswapodcast.com. And last but certainly not least, we are proud to be a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Go on over to WrestleCopia.com to check out all the great pro wrestling related podcasts and various content that our friend Ray Russell provides you. You'll be glad you did. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week for another episode of Dangerous Conversations with Dangerous Doug Gilbert and Tommy Wildfire Rich.
In the heart of Tennessee, born with pride, Doug and Tommy taking rings in stride. Memphis legends never backing down. Wrestling warriors, they wear the crown. Used to be away, glory in their veins. Fighting legends breaking chains. In the square circle they made their name. Podcast champions, it's their claim to fame. On the mic they rode, on the map they sold. Dangerous conversations, fans wanting more. Podcast kings ruling the waves. Memphis wrestling raising the stage. From title belts to Hall of Fame, Doug and Tommy carved the name. Fists of fury and hearts of gold. Every story, every fight retold. Tales of glory, laughter, cry. Tennessee warriors with hearts open wide. In the ring or on the air, legends living without a care. On the mic they roar, on the mat they soar. Dangerous conversations, fans wanting more. Podcast kings ruling the waves. Memphis wrestling raising the stage.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com. And to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.